an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Killing Eve, Season 2, Episode 2. Nice and neat. In this episode, Villanelle is looking for help from pretty much anywhere that she can scrounge it up. And she winds up picking the wrong person. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. First up, I want to thank Tonje Louise Skoldhammer for commissioning this episode. I really hope I'm saying your name right. Apologies if not, but do let me know. I can't believe how long it's been since the last episode. It was March. It does not feel that long to me. But I can't believe how much has turned so quickly in this show. When we last ended, Eve was sort of she was in a very bad place mentally. We had her kind of trembling from what could be probably just called shock. Might be a little bit of PTSD, I don't know. In the bathtub of her apartment and ordering windows from a salesman and just generally acting pretty erratic. And then this episode opens, and if it weren't for the fact that we see Villanelle get out of the family's car, that trunk, I would have thought several days had passed. I really didn't, Eve has turned a corner so much in her behavior at the beginning of this episode and has seemed to come to terms so much with what has happened and is behaving much more normally than I would have expected with her husband, that it feels like it's been a week at least and she has had the time to get a hold of herself. But once we go hang out with Villanelle, it's like they drove the rest of the day and now they're home. And I might be misunderstanding, and maybe she was in the car for a couple of days and it was a longer road trip than that. But I have a hard time already suspending my disbelief that this family would never have gone into the trunk of their car for anything that whole time. And that's just if it were a one-day road trip. If I'm supposed to believe they've been on the road for a couple of days and never went into the trunk, that's not happening at all. So I have to believe it's only been one day. And even that, I've only traveled with kids once, and we were in and out of the trunk so much for snacks and toys and changes of clothes. And it's just, I am barely willing to suspend my disbelief for that. But I will, but not for multiple days. So anyway, I just didn't expect for Eve to have kind of gotten her act together so completely that she seems practically normal. And we know she's not, especially once we see how she behaves around her colleagues and when she's alone. But there's a certain amount of energy needed to maintain that veneer. And I wouldn't even have thought that she had the energy to do it. To pretend. So I'm a little bit thrown, I guess is what I'm saying, by the way that this starts off. I wasn't expecting it to feel this comfortable again this quickly. Meanwhile, Villanelle has climbed out of the back of that family's car, wearing that little boy's pajamas and the nurse shoes that she stole, carrying this briefcase, which we saw her stuff full of antibiotics and all kinds of things. Later on, this gets stolen from her. I really loved getting to see her walk down the middle of the street carrying this, wearing this outfit. If I don't believe, and I might be wrong, but I don't believe that there are pop dolls for killing Eve. And if there are, I want it to be Villanelle in these pajamas carrying this weird briefcase. That's what I want her pop doll to be. This is such an excellent example of the kinds of situations that she gets herself in. It's a nice summary of her, you know? So she is, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. And I do like when I talk about Eve acting pretty normal, I am saying like, you know, she's out here pretending to shop on her computer when her husband looks up and he says something about how she really has changed. And I expected her, as soon as he turns over, to bounce right back into whatever it was that she had been looking at, which we know she's looking for. Any reports of a body turning up because she believes that she killed Villanelle. She's not positive, but she's erring on that side of the situation. And when he points out that the blue one is sexy, she winds up putting it in her cart and deciding that she is going to order it anyway. And it's just a moment of like normality that I never thought was going to happen this soon. So then we see Villanelle and she has fallen asleep at the laundromat and somebody has taken stuff out of her briefcase. And the woman who runs the laundromat is very uninterested in her plight and kind of laughs at her. And Villanelle turns over a container of laundry detergent, like one of the powder ones, before she runs out, in a wonderful display of sheer pettiness that I think is what we all love about her, if I'm not mistaken. That is just one of those things that you think about doing, but most of us have too much shame to really do. We would just be like, oh, that makes me look bad, not them. But Villanelle is so like totally devoid of that kind of shame. And she's so childlike as well, in that she has a very sort of simple system, I think, for what's acceptable and what's not, that it makes total sense she decides to do this. And it is just, honestly, it's so unwarranted. This woman is I'm not mad at her for probably having to deal with the kinds of people that she does every day, for behaving this way with Villanelle, who is a rather bratty, as Eve describes her later, person. Yeah, you know, but nevertheless, I do kind of enjoy this moment. So now she's out here and just like, she's gonna get feverish. She's gonna start to suffer because she doesn't have the medication she needs. And she has nowhere to hole up and be safe. Now, I was kind of thinking, as this continued, that it was surprising she doesn't have a, like, contact that she can get in touch with. And then I was assuming, well, I guess she can't, because the last person that was supposed to be her handler, she shot in the head. And then she was supposed to kill Constantine, and she failed to do that. So maybe she just assumes that they have washed their hands of her, which is probably a safe assumption. But then, interestingly, later on, it pretty much seems like she assumes that they have washed their hands of her until she really thinks that she's in big trouble. And they are still here for her. And by here for her, I definitely don't mean in like a supportive way. The man nearly strangles her to death. So it's a bad scene. But I really expected that if she tried to call in any sort of favor of saving her life, that they would just show up to kill her and wash their hands of her in that way. And I guess it makes sense that they wouldn't really want to do that, because they've probably invested a huge amount of money into training her in the first place. And they want to see if they can recoup that investment and get her well and probably sort of like reprogrammed so that she will start listening to their orders again. But, or what could potentially be going on as well is that they really, really need Constantine dead. And she was supposed to be the one to do it. And they think they can send her to finish the job because as much as Villanelle like had a little bit of affection for Constantine, and I say a little bit because it's very difficult for me to really know how sincere she ever is. I think that Villanelle is not somebody who would let that kind of affection overtake her desire to kill. She clearly enjoys killing just for the sake of it. It's something that she gets off on in her way. And also, she's got a lot of pride around being able to kill people that she shouldn't, like, that should be impossible to get to. And having this record that is kind of amazing of accomplishing, you know, these kills and always getting the target every time. So I can really see Villanelle being irritated that Constantine got away. I feel like that's the sort of thing that would bother her. It's more than... I feel like that for her would outweigh any affection. You know, there is... That means something to her record in that way. And I don't even mean like in terms of her reputation. It's a personal thing. It's something that even if only she knew that she had failed at this, it wouldn't matter that somebody else is watching her being like, oh, you failed this task. For her, it is really not something she can deal with. And I really deeply understand what that is like. That is also something that I am like at times. So anyway, that's an interesting theory. And if she is after Constantine, we wind up finding out where he is at the end of this episode. And I guess everybody better just watch the fuck out because they are a lot closer to this than they think, if I am correct. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So there's a moment where Eve is talking about, and I really liked this scene, how she had a dream about Bill. I picked up my phone the other day to text him. Guys, this is just really heartbreaking. It's a beautifully subtle scene. She doesn't burst into tears. She's not sobbing while she says this. She's thoughtful. She's being genuine, which with her and her husband, that's not something that you just see often, unfortunately. And that is one of the things that I think is the most difficult to get used to in regard to grief. And people don't really warn you, or they can't warn you, because how can you possibly understand what they even mean until it happens? But when there is somebody who has been a part of your life so intrinsically for such a long time, when they are gone, there are habits and reactions that you have that are simply automatic and instinctive, and you don't even realize are there until you go to do them and realize that that person will not be there to receive whatever it is. I had a very similar thing a couple of times with my dad. He passed away, and then I would have a dream that I had hung out with him. And I would wake up and I would be like, God, I haven't talked to him in a while. I really should call him. And I'd go to pick up my phone thinking to myself, why don't I call him more? And then all of a sudden it'd be like, oh, right, because he's dead. And it was just a shock. And it's like, it's terribly sad, but it's also something that's so startling because you really feel that somebody being dead, you don't think that you are going to forget that. You don't think that somebody who's important to you, the fact that they're not here anymore, is going to slip your mind. And granted, in the fog of having just awoken from a dream, it's understandable. But I think that's part of what kept me from just like dissolving into tears was just this moment of like, oh, that is really weird. I can't believe I forgot. And that's sort of the expression that she has here of like saying that she went to text him and that like she's so surprised at herself and almost disapproving because she feels like, how could I have forgotten, you know? And then she apologizes and says that we shouldn't talk about this. And her husband says, no, this is how it works. And I love this interaction between the two of them because she keeps on saying gross and ew as he reaches out to her to be supportive of her. And it was like just an extremely familiar sort of neither of us is willing to be vulnerable kind of moment. Me and Owen will do this sometimes. One of us will start to open up, realize that we kind of don't want to do that right now. And the other will sense that's exactly what just happened and cover for us and like kind of make a joke or open up the door to a joke in order to let the other person bow out of that moment gracefully. And that's totally what happened here. And it's just, I just really liked this scene. It's very short. I could see people not remembering this at all, but it felt like such a real moment that I could see this exact thing having happened to one of the writers and they practically put it down verbatim. And as he's leaving, she says, be careful. And that's another thing. Now, granted, the difference here is obvious because she's saying be careful because she knows that there's a possibility Villanelle is alive and still out there. But also, when you remember the death of somebody that you care about, all of a sudden the people around you become very precious and also suddenly you realize how fragile they are. And this is a thing that will happen with me. I will think about my dad and then Owen will come in the room and tell me that he's about to head out. And I'm just like, wear your seatbelt. It's just one of those things that you're just like, oh God, I can't go through that again. Don't do it. Please be careful. And just all of this is just so good. So then we go to the incredibly awkward scene at the grocery store. I'm going to take a sip here of a drink. Hold on. I love this scene so much. Villanelle is trying to pick out a target to manipulate to help her. I know I've said it already, but I love listening to her slip in and out of different accents. And the British accent is one of my particular favorites. I assumed that this actress is British and that this is her real accent. But I could also be like, even if she actually is British, this might be a fake accent because there are so many variations. So I don't know. But she spots this older man who looks to be maybe Indian. And he is in this aisle and she makes eye contact with him. And she sort of like moves in this way that feels very predatory, honestly. And then a woman on the other side of the aisle that did not look like she was with him comes and puts her hand on his arm and sort of carries him off. And Villanelle realizes that the target that she picked is not going to work out. She needs somebody who is by themselves. And she's obviously going after men who are older because she is young and pretty. And she feels like that is going to be a safe bet in terms of manipulation, which like it is. She is correct. So as she is walking up to him to say something, and then he gets, pulled away by his wife, she's passing a mirror at this makeup display. And she stops and looks at herself in shock because Villanelle is used to being gorgeous and she's looking a little haggard. I mean, you just got stabbed and beaten the head with a log. It's fine. You're allowed to look haggard. But she stops and begins to apply a little bit of makeup in order to improve her look so that her attempt at manipulation will go over a little bit better. She first tries it on a woman whose immediate response is to say that she doesn't have any change and walk away. The woman has this like really gross attitude too, as she says it. It is such a moment of like, I really want to follow that lady and slap and shake her. And you kind of get the sense that Villanelle also wants to do that. But eventually she spots this guy who is pulling a bunch of stuff out of Frozen, and she stares at him. And it is one of the most uncomfortable moments. Like her staring, standing unmoving, smiling. She's doing that white person smile where you just kind of, stretch your mouth a little bit. And, it's her trying to be like, she wants to hold his attention, but she doesn't want to make a move quite yet. And so I guess this is as non-threatening as she can think to be. And then she decides that she is going to attempt to fake her way into a place to stay by telling him that the man outside, he is her stepfather, and shows him her face and says that he is the one who did this to her. And I need someone to help me get out of here without him seeing. Can you please help me? In one of the more hilarious bits of like physical comedy, where she just shuffles along behind him out of the building. And I know like she's trying to tell him that he can't see me. I need to be behind you. But it really is the sort of thing that is more noticeable than otherwise, and I had another moment, and I have this with the show all the time. When they get to his car, he puts her in the passenger seat. But because I'm American, saw that the side that she was getting in on, and I was like, is he giving her his car to drive? What is this? And then I realized, the steering wheel isn't there. That's the passenger seat. Right. So we get our first indication that everything is not okay in a very subtle moment of he says, you'd be completely safe, of course. If you're worried, I would never. And I'm like, I mean, that sounds all well and good. But then when he says, do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares, she says, I guess, but that would make me an angel. And he says, I suppose it would. And he glances over at her in this way. And it's honestly completely, for me, undercut him being like, oh, you'll be fine. Not even because I thought things were going to go the way they go. I didn't predict that. But I predicted him being really cloying. And that's clearly what she thinks too, because she turns away from him and gives this grimace, and it is amazing. So when they go back to his house, it's loaded with dolls. And so this is when the alarms really start to go off. Now, I'm not trying to say that if you like dolls, you're a creep. But what I will say is, if you have this many dolls, you're probably a creep. You can like dolls, but this is more than liking dolls. This is uncomfortable. They are watching every move you make. This is a level beyond liking, and obsession isn't even quite right either, because there's more of a intrinsic, it's not even a hobby. It's just something that's left over from his mother. And I believe him when he says that, but we get to see how he treats his mother. So it's more than just an obsession, because it doesn't even belong to him. It's a part of his personality. It's more than that, And, oh God, it is just, he doesn't tell her that his mother is still alive. He makes it like seem as if they used to be my mother's. She used to collect them. Everything he says about his mother is in the past tense. And later on, when we find out that she is still in the house, but he didn't tell Villanelle about her, that he is locking her in for what he claims is her own safety. It's awful, because there's a part of you that's looking on this with huge suspicion, understandably. He didn't tell her, even though he knows that she's going to be here for a couple of days at minimum. He has to know that she's going to figure this out, either by like going into the room, because it's bolted from the outside, so it's not like she can't get in, or like what actually happens, hearing her moving around at night, or just generally being like, what's in there? Eventually she's going to start to ask questions. So I don't know what he was thinking by not telling her, but maybe he didn't expect her to still be here after a couple days. So things start off with her getting him to go and get her a lemon drizzle cake. And it seems like he is sort of a sad man, but her manipulation does seem to be going okay. He goes to get her a cake right away. But as he leaves the house, you can hear the key turn in the lock. He's locking the door behind him, which one could say he believes that she is somebody who is being abused by a person who, for all he knows, saw them leave and followed them. But and then we have the discovery of his mother being alive. That, paired with the way he shoves his fingers in her mouth, guys, do you remember this? She says something about needing antibiotics. She gets tonsillitis very easily, and she might have it again. So he says that he will check, and tells her to open her mouth and shoves his fingers onto her tongue to hold it out of the way while he looks. And she really wants to kill him. It takes everything in her to restrain herself from reaching out and strangling this man, because she's still a little bit too weak. If she had done things now, it probably would have gone better for everyone, because later on, she's so weakened that she sustains a pretty terrible amount of damage in that fight that she might have been able to avoid. But she's got her fever and everything is set in later on, you know. I loved this show's depiction of this guy as a creep. They do such a great job of giving us one red flag after another with just enough restraint that you can let yourself believe the guy might be harmless. That you're like, this guy is a fucking creep. And then you're like, maybe he's just a weirdo. And you keep doing it over and over, and you keep excusing things over and over, because they are very slowly ramping it up. And that's what happens when you are a victim of abuse. It gets normalized over time because the abuser continues to push and push the envelope to see what you will let them get away with. And they take their cue from you. They figure out what you'll tolerate and push you right up to the edge. And then once they see that you're serious and you're about to leave, they pretend that they are so sorry. And they might even mean it. When I say pretend, it makes it sound like they are lying. I sometimes believe that abusers are genuine, and that's part of what makes them so incredibly dangerous. And they will turn on the waterworks and just, I will change. I can't believe, what do you think of me? I mean, it's exactly what he does later when she says her lie about the cake. But the difference is that Villanelle isn't who he thinks. If she were the person that he believes her to be, this tactic of ramping it up and being slightly more creepy might actually have succeeded in him getting what basically would probably turn into a captive, and maybe turn into a sex slave. I mean, if we're going to be just perfectly honest about what's happening here, because he believes that she's already somebody who has been abused and is desperate and has no self-worth. So prime target, right? But that's not who she is. So she reaches the end of her tether much more quickly and is willing to react much more violently once she gets there. I'm going to back up a little bit and let's talk about what's going on with Eve. Eve is... she has been assigned to this new task force, I guess, in a different, like, you know, it's no longer in that really sketchy flat in London. This is a gated building, and she has to put in her identification to get into the gate. It's a very, very different situation. And it's amazing. She, like, comes through the gate, and then around the corner comes Carolyn. And I was so glad that Eve asks her this, because she steps out and she is wearing this spectacular outfit. And it's one of those outfits that's really very simple. If I saw it on a hanger, I wouldn't be like, oh, that looks great. It wouldn't really catch me at all. I think it's a combination of the way Evelyn wears it, or not Evelyn, Carolyn, and the whole attitude that she has, and seeing it in motion. But she's got this like ankle length, like, you know, those sort of high water pants that not everybody can pull off. I'm looking at you, men ages 25 to 30, and a like loose white silk blouse that like wraps but is very like kind of blouson, and a very tailored gray cardigan that almost looks like a blazer, and a pair of beautiful simple gray loafers that it's just, she looks amazing. And as soon as she walks out, I'm like, damn, that outfit. And then Eve says, how do you always look so good? And I was like, thank you, Eve. I also would like to know, because what the fuck? And she says it's her moisturizer. It's made of pig's placenta. It costs a fortune and smells like ass, but it is exceedingly effective. To which Eve says, I don't mind smelling like ass. And she says, I'll send you the link. I love anybody who gives an honest answer about how they look and why they, you know, like, that's actually a way to really like claim my heart as a makeup artist as well. Is makeup artists who admit to having had plastic surgery or enhancements of some kind. The woman who she came out as trans like earlier this year, I think. She has like a whole video about her lip injections that she gets and like how much they cost and how long they take and the effects they have right after and how often she has to get them done. And it's just like, when people are very, very frank about that sort of thing, I really appreciate it, because there's no harm. We all are human beings. I don't believe that, you know, that this is all just an accident of nature. So it turns out that Carolyn has assembled a group of people to help them figure out what's going on with Villanelle and this murder that they just investigated in the last episode of the man who it appeared had a heart attack or a stroke. But they found an injection site under his toenail that they believe was administered by his pedicurist. And as Eve is following Carolyn in, she says, what if you'd told these guys my role is exactly? And she says, outside expert on female assassins. And I really like that moment of Eve letting it sink in, because Eve clearly doesn't really think of herself as an expert, but it's not untrue. You know, I don't know. It's such a funny thing, guys, being a woman. And I'm sure this goes for men to a point as well, depending on who they are. But men are much more prepared to see themselves as experts on things than a lot of women are. We are often taught to discount our own educations and experiences because of all of these, like, you know, this perfect storm in our heads of the people we think are out there who are more equipped and have the experience or the expertise. And oftentimes when you really stack things up and you look at it objectively, we do have what would qualify us as experts, but we just don't see ourselves that way. And I have had more than one person, like, you know, call me a professional podcaster. And I'm like, no, my immediate reaction is like, I'm not a professional. I just do it from home. I'm not I think professional, and there's a very specific kind of image in my head of what that means. And I am super duper not that. So I am my reaction is, no, I'm not. But I literally podcast for a living. That's what I do as my job. Yeah, I'm a professional podcaster. And I don't know why. My knee-jerk reaction is like, no, me? No. And I feel like that's what happens right here with Eve a little bit. Is she has like her instinct is to be like, me. And then she sort of stops herself and is like, I guess. So Eve comes in and Kenny is here, and there's this weird, like, kind of hug moment that leads to a little bit later, the two of them are alone together and acting super weird in front of this new guy. And he asks if they're having an affair, and Eve decides that it's just easier if people think that's what's going on. So she says yes. And this, like, weird half hug pull away thing that they do feels like more evidence that they are having an affair. Like, I would think something was up between the two of them if I saw that. So yeah, Carolyn says, I thought it might be useful to keep the Trafalgar team intact, as she calls it. And we find out that Elena felt the job was no longer for her. She's worried about getting murdered. I don't know what to think. If she is truly out of it, or if this is like a temporary thing and she'll be coming back. But it really disappointed me. I enjoyed that actress a lot, and I really don't want her to be gone. At the same time, it does feel very much in her character, because she was the more cautious of everyone, that she would be the first to be like, nope, I'm out. Thanks. Bye. And it might just come down to the actress had another project and she decided to go and work on that. That might be all it is, once she realized that she wasn't going to have a huge role here. But we meet the other two people who are new parts of the team. So there's Jess, and Jess is played by, I am pretty sure, the secretary from Love Actually, who talks shit about the other girl having a giant ass and huge thighs. So I am predisposed to not like Jess just because I associate her with that other character. And it is not fair. But there it is. So Jess, you are going to have to force me to warm up to you, because as of right now, I see you and I'm just like, oh, it's this bitch. And then there is Hugo. She calls him Dog's Body and Total Cambridge Posh Boy. Apologies for him in advance. And he tells her, Oxford, actually. Just pretends not to remember to hurt my feelings. She's very undermining. And I love him, like, kind of reaching around her to give Eve a handshake in a way that both Jess and Eve sort of like look at him and the body language of it. And as he walks away, Jess says, welcome to MI6, an old Etonian sitting in the corner waiting to steal your job. So evidently this particular type of boy is somebody that is of a type. But yeah, around every corner waiting to steal your job. And the look that Eve gives him, and later on he interrupts her at one point, and she is literally mid-sentence saying, this is probably somebody that nobody notices or takes seriously. Definitely a woman, most definitely someone who looks like an immigrant and is not white. And he interrupts to be like, how do you know that? And she says, because you just interrupted me mid-sentence. That's how I know that. And I was just like, oh, show. I love you so much right now. Thank you. But what I'm not sure what to think of her new team. And I got sort of like pre-invested in the old team, thinking that that we were going to be hanging out with them a lot more than we are. I expected this, honestly, when you look at the way this starts off, and this team that is assembled of people that she has worked with for a while and some new people that she doesn't know very well. I really expected this to be danger that is faced with a group of rascals that we get to know better and love more and more as each episode goes by. And it has not been that at all. This team is very fractured. Carolyn has proven to be somebody that we can't trust. And that's not even like she's a traitor. That's more of just we, the viewer, do not know what Carolyn is up to. And we have begun to realize that her standards of morality are very, very different than what we thought they were going to be. So what she thinks is the right thing to do may not line up with what we assume the right thing to do is. And just basically, I have to keep an eye on her. Her son is her son, and he will act against her as much as he can. But in the end, it seems like he is kind of afraid. And then we have these two new factors here, Jess and Hugo. Hugo, was that the one? And I don't know anything about them yet. So, and I mean, we had Bill get stabbed, and now Elena is gone. So this is just not what I expected. So I really love the scene where she's sitting in the coffee room and Kenny comes in and says, Eve, what happened? Mom said you went to Paris. And she jumps up and says, I'm so glad to see you. And is in the middle of she is going to pour out her heart about what happened. And Hugo walks in and then realizes that they're having an affair, or that's what he thinks. It is a very well played scene. He leaves, and she tells Kenny that she stabbed Villanelle. Now, here's my deviance from Hugo's, and I don't really know why Eve asks his opinion on what she should do here, because he's a kid. Look at him. He's got to be 20? Maybe. He's a kid. And she asks him whether he thinks that she should tell Carolyn about stabbing Eve. And he advises her, absolutely not. You're withholding information on an investigation you're working on. I do not agree with that. I think you get caught continuing to withhold that information, and that's going to look far worse for you than than telling her now that some shit went very left and you assumed she was dead and have started to realize that isn't what happened. I mean, I feel like Carolyn is the kind of person that would not have the reaction Eve thinks she would have to that information. Now, I don't know what happens then, because Carolyn sort of disbanded the entire team over believing that the two of them went behind her back, which they did. So maybe she would shut it all down with this reveal. But I guess what the difference between how I'm operating here and how Eve operates is that she is going forward with the assumption that she will be able to hide this from Carolyn forever. And I assume it's coming out eventually, that that's what happened. So I just can't imagine Eve getting that's the fundamental, and that's the difference between and there's a lot of characters that they just go forward and they just act like, I guess I'll just be able to keep the secret forever. And I'm always like, that's not going to work. Most people can't keep secrets forever. Most people can't. It's just a fact. Somebody usually finds out. But I mean, even if they do eventually track Villanelle down, she's going to have a stab wound. She's going to reference that Eve did this. Villanelle's not going to keep Eve's secret about that. And if they have Constantine having caught up with them at this point, I don't know what access Constantine has to information that he used to have access to before they decided that they were going to try and kill him. But I feel like he's going to find out some shit went down as well. I just don't know what that all looks like. So anyway, she then begins to talk about the way that Villanelle operates and calls her flamboyant, attention-seeking, instinctive, spoilt, easily bored, but not sloppy. And it's great. She's talking about all of this in this voice that is at first very clinical. And then as she continues talking about her, there's more and more personal reaction and passion in the way that she is describing this person. Versus the person that they talk about later, who she begins to realize is not a victim, or who she begins to figure out that the victim that they looked at the end of the last episode, who had the injection under his toenail, that he is not one of Villanelle's victims, that this is a totally different operator who they decided to begin calling the Ghost. And we get to see a pretty beautifully done, extremely... It's filmed in such a way that we are following the victim and we do not see the assassin thinking through the attack. We don't see the expression on their face. We don't see their face at all. The focus is entirely on the victim because it is meant to emphasize how little the operator is noticed by anybody and how background they are. The one time that they are focused in on is to really let us know that she's carrying this other matching coffee cup. That's all that is for. It is not about her. It's to signal to the audience the method of the murder. So I really liked that. I liked her describing how this person's extremely subtle and somebody that nobody sees. And if you are in the service industry, you already know what this is like. If you are non-white and in the service industry, that's a whole other level. And if you are cleaning staff, that is yet a different level. Being cleaning staff, that's just its own thing, the way that you're treated and looked at. And as somebody who is engaged to a person who works in that industry, it is kind of shocking, and it shouldn't be, but it is. The things that they are expected to do with no compunction whatsoever, because they are not really seen as people. And it's, yeah. So that person just is the polar opposite of Villanelle. Villanelle wants people to know that she has killed somebody. She wants people to admire the method by which she did it. That's part of why she enjoys the people who are supposed to be impossible to get. And she likes doing things that are a little bit outlandish because she wants to keep it interesting for herself, not because she wants other people to be that impressed with it. That's certainly a factor, but I really think more than that, it's for her own benefit. She just wants to have fun doing this job. So this Ghost, they want to remain completely unnoticed. They don't want anyone even knowing these people have been murdered necessarily. They want to flit in and out and be a complete mystery. And I'm wondering very much if we are going to see much of this person. Eve has a reaction to finding out that there is another operator out there. She says that Villanelle is going to be so pissed. And that's an interesting thing that didn't occur to me, because I wouldn't think that somebody who operates this differently would be seen as a threat to Villanelle. Yes, she is also an assassin, but there are clearly other assassins working because of this, group that Villanelle works for. And she was teamed up with two of them to complete a mission. It's like, I don't think she sees other assassins as being an inherent threat for existing. And I'm really curious why Eve believes Villanelle will have that reaction. And I'm curious to see if she's right. I don't know. But in any case, she is kind of zeroing in on where Villanelle likely was last. She searches for information about a victim of a stabbing. Initially, that doesn't turn up anything. And then she begins to zero in a little bit more. And she finds out about a murder victim at a hospital. And she starts to piece together that likely was Villanelle and that she is still alive. Eventually, we get the phone call from Villanelle that gives them a direct line to not the exact house she's in. They figure it out, but they have an area code, apparently, because she used an operator to call instead of dialing directly, which is fascinating to me. I don't even know if you have a landline in the United States. Can you still call an operator? I assume that is still something that exists, because not everybody, not only does not everybody have a cell phone they can look up phone numbers on, or a computer, but not everybody is sighted. And I would imagine that's a really handy resource for somebody who can't read or can't see. But I didn't know that led to not necessarily being able to trace the call. And again, maybe that doesn't work that way in the US, but I found that really, really interesting. So when we go back to Villanelle, this moment, she's asking him to go to the pharmacy and get some stuff for her. She wants the antibiotic prescription. He does this really weird thing when he realizes that she has put on the list some sanitary napkins, as he calls them, and says, "Oh, that'll cause a stir. I'll have to say that for my girlfriend," and gives her this look. But by the time the camera goes over to her, she appears to be asleep. I am assuming that is feigned, because I would not want to acknowledge that either. And we find out later, he doesn't get her the antibiotics. He appears to sort of like that she is sick. And that helps him keep control over her. So he'll do what he can to make her comfortable in terms of giving the appearance of taking care of her. But in terms of actually taking care of her, he is not interested, because he likes this exactly the way it is. And we get this really freaky moment of her on the couch, and his mother is sitting there as well. And at first, when she starts talking to Villanelle, Villanelle believes that this woman has been faking her dementia, because she zeroes in and says, "It's nice to see you again." But then she says, "How are you, Deb?" And Villanelle realizes that she sees somebody else sitting here. Or "How's Deb?" Something like that. And then she says, "You will watch out for Julian, though, won't you?" And she says, "What do you mean?" And the woman says, "He's a nice boy, really." With the vibe of somebody who's about to be like, But I did catch him like killing frogs really slowly over an open Bic flame. Like, that's the kind of thing that a mother says when she's like, I don't want you to think that my kid is like a nightmare. So I'm going to say this nightmare thing in a voice that makes it sound like it's not a big deal, even though it's definitely an indicator of psychopathic behavior. This woman knows that her son is a mess, and likely him locking her up is part of that, I feel. And there is even a possibility that he is giving her something to make her demented because she knows things. I would not put that past him, because this is a man that if you told me there were several bodies buried in his backyard, I would have 100% believe you. The way he's handling Villanelle, I do not buy this is his first time doing this at all. But we will never know, or maybe we will, but we don't find out this episode. So we go with Eve and Carolyn to the home of the man who was murdered. Who was like one of the richest men in the country, evidently, but he lived in this house that Eve is just kind of baffled by. To me, it looks like a very nice house, but apparently that is, not what she expected. And his two kids do an amazing job of portraying incredibly privileged people with almost nothing more than their postures. They are excellent at this, and you just really do not like either one of them right away. They're both attractive, and they are both doing a very different kind of rich kid thing. He is extremely tailored and put together and, clean shaven, close cropped hair. She is the bohemian, and she's smoking when they come in and just, much more rumpled. But these two, I'm wondering what their deal is going to be, because I feel like they were really established in this episode in a way that makes them feel like they're not going to be just in this one episode. And I really do not like either one of them at all. And I'm not entirely sure I buy that neither of them was involved either. The son, especially, it's possible they both were, or the daughter was, but he is the one that convinces me the least with his act of, no, that's not right. He had a heart attack. She's the one who seems more emotional about being like, no, that's not what happened. And he is a lot more like poker faced. So I'm more suspicious of him, but I could just be reading into that. Eve shows them each the photo of Villanelle, trying to see if they recognize her, and neither of them does, which in her opinion solidifies her theory that it is not Villanelle who's carrying out these murders. And then we have Villanelle, who has started to catch on to the fact that this guy has locked every window. This guy has locked all the doors. He has made it so that she can't get out of this house. And she decides to try and call her backup plan, who basically tells her, I'm sorry, we don't know who you are or what you want. Bye. And they just hang up. So she calls MI6. And it seems like she is just talking to a machine, but we find out later that it is being recorded. The number that she was sent to, they do monitor that. And they trace that at the same time as she is getting into her fight with Julian. It's amazing, the fight with Julian, too. He is screaming at her, basically, about how ungrateful she is because he comes home and finds the phone off the hook and wants to know who she was calling, and says, I've done all this for you, and what do I get? Clearly basically being like, you're supposed to fuck me to say thanks. And she tells him she was ordering a bakery to thank him for being her knight in shining armor. And he falls apart at this explanation. And he's like, what must you think of me? And she says, I think you will die bleeding. And then we get this fight. It was a hard fight to watch because we know she's injured and he goes right for that injury. And it reminded me of like it reminded me of Gandalf and Saruman fighting, where it's just two people who both look like they are not up to this. And it fucking hurt to watch. But in the end, she stabs him in the throat. I cheered like a motherfucker. And when they find his body later, she's got the fucking toilet brush stuffed in his mouth. And honestly, that made me so deeply happy in my heart, because that man is a bad man. And that's fine. Go ahead. I'm fine with it. She gets picked up by apparently one of the people from the original number she called, that they reacted the way they did because that was not a secure line, but they did show up, and she behaves as if she is going to be uncooperative, which prompts this man to begin to strangle her to death. And you get a real vibe from him as he begins to strangle her that he is getting off on this a lot. And he has to stop himself before he actually kills her with a bit of actual effort. He really has to stop and be like, no, 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 and stop himself. And the two of them drive off just as Villanelle, or just as Eve and Carolyn pull up to the scene. And Eve does not see them driving past. And the fucking body of her victim is still warm in the house. So they know she is still, like, she was just here, but they just missed her. Leighton is in the chat, says, I thought that guy was Arthur Weasley. No, ma'am, that was not. She says, all British dudes look the same. Yeah, he is real good at being, that's a man that has that steady growing, like, sinister quality, the same way that Julian did, really. Some overtime, I have to wrap up, but this was a really weird episode, bonkers episode, but I liked it a lot. I have no idea what's coming next. And I just, yeah, I'm excited to see the next episode. Let me see how quickly I can pull that information up, because now I've got myself wondering when that is. So today is the 8th. The next episode is on the 12th, and then no episodes until July. July 10th, I'm going to be having two episodes are booked, but I'm gonna have to move one of those. Sorry, Andrea. So if you guys want more episodes of those, of Killing Eve, you are going to want to get on that unspoiled.com/shop or unspoiledpodcast.com/shop. All right. Thank you guys again for listening and hanging out with me. And I'll be seeing you again pretty soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.